Welcome to Part C of Effective Instruction by Design, responding to students with special needs by adapting, accommodating, and modifying the curriculum. Once you have completed a lesson plan using the UDL principles and applying differentiated processes and products, you must continue to ask yourself the important question about access as it relates to all of your students. What does access mean? Access refers to the opportunity for all children to understand curriculum. Curriculum includes all of the content, activities, and assessments included in your lesson. Reflecting on cognitive, sensory, cultural, linguistic, and social-emotional behavioral variance in your class, consider the accessibility of your curriculum. Grading students with disabilities tends to be a controversial issue and could be discussed over an entire course. The most important issue to consider relating to access is understanding that students with disabilities must make progress on two standards: grade level content standards and IEP objectives that are often below grade level. Teacher-made content assessments generally contain biased values, and all students are expected to achieve the same degree of success. Project rubrics that consider basic requirements for meeting proficiency and add levels of rigor for accelerated students provide improved access to fair measures of success. Field-tested projects and assessments reduce bias as well. Students with challenges completing independent work without accommodations, such as doing homework, should receive modified expectations that do not bias their grade due to lack of access or an assumption that effort and access equates to meeting proficient standards. In other words, grade students with disability on achievement of standards, measured when all IEP accommodations have been provided, rather than on what you personally value as important. Usually, it's your perception of their effort. During every IEP team meeting, professionals are required to discuss a student's need for assistive technology. Limited research describes the fidelity of this process, but from my experience, I can say there's a school district bias against AT due to perceived costs involved. Most districts with limited resources limit AT access to children with communication disabilities. Oral and written communication can be facilitated by AT. And some students require AT to communicate. Because special education only needs to provide an appropriate education and not adequate or best practices, AT is often restricted to children who require AT to communicate. Increasingly, tech-savvy teachers recognize the research and marketing of tablet devices for children in classrooms and their availability to provide accessibility tools that improve reading, writing, and oral communication. Additionally, the use of mobile devices such as smartphones have become accessibility tools for all children in secondary level schools. The Common Core standards and legal mandate that all children should be technologically literate by the end of 8th grade have motivated districts to alter their views of mobile devices in school. A trend has been to teach children to use devices as tools rather than toys. What do you think about this trend? If you have computers in your classroom, you can turn on the accessibility features so children can use text-to-speech and have material read aloud to them. Follow the directions in this slide. Additionally, if you have children on various reading levels, you can check the readability of your Word documents or teacher-made worksheets, assessments, organizers. By following these directions, a report will indicate the grade level on which your text is written. Keep in mind that communication you send to caregivers should be written below a 6th grade level. Calculator use for students with learning, intellectual, attention, emotional, and sensory challenges has been one of the strongest evidence-based practices researched, which is why there's such a common accommodation. For example, the Texas Instrument 15 calculator can eliminate the multiple procedures required for students to compute fractions with unlike denominators, which significantly reduce barriers that working memory deficits pose. Some teachers may value learning procedures of calculation and reduce access to calculators. This is an example of unprofessional biases. When students require AT for communication, teachers are more likely to ensure access because they themselves require the device to understand students. Taken together, teachers must keep in mind that specialists and teams follow legal processes for determining AT provision, and that AT, accommodations, supplementary aids and services written in IEPs must be implemented. If you have students you believe would benefit from access to AT, you should advocate for them by requesting an IEP meeting. AT can include anything from audiobooks available on an iPod to a wheelchair to adaptive writing and eating utensils. Within school districts and special education departments, related service providers include assistive technology specialists. Often, speech and language pathologists serve as AT specialists, but the AT role has become increasingly independent as its use has increased. Collaborating with special education providers can increase your awareness of the abundant AT tools available to your students. The website www.cast.org also provides professional development that can improve your understanding of the differences between assistive technology and educational technology. Have you ever heard anyone refer to the television as a great babysitter? In some cases, researchers have seen the use of computer-assisted instruction as a great teacher. However, research explicitly suggests that CAI is ineffective without teacher-led instruction, modeling, and progress monitoring toward mastery. Now let's shift our focus from technology to other means of providing access. Adaptations can include accommodations or modifications. Accommodations are allowable changes in educational environments or practices, like supports or services, that help students overcome barriers a disability imposes. Modifications are for students who require more support or adjustments than accommodations provide and can impose formal consequences related to achieving a standard diploma in some states. Modifications should only be considered after all other accessibility issues have been addressed, and progress monitoring clearly illustrates that a student cannot access standard, field-tested, grade-level curriculum unless it's modified. Let's consider language arts standards, since they apply to every teacher across content areas. All students need to be able to identify the main idea and details explicitly stated in a portion of grade-level text. Accommodations can include the text being read aloud, hypertext linking to vocabulary terms, graphic organizers that visually guide a student to identify main ideas and details, visual cues that highlight main ideas and details, a scribe to whom a student dictates the main idea and details with oral rehearsal and revision opportunities, and several others. You can see the resources provided. Modifications might include providing an alternative text below grade level, matching the student's needs, that is simplified but contains similar content. IEPs might also require a prompting system in which a paraprofessional may gesture or model correct answers that students repeat. Changing the number of questions on a test is an accommodation. Reducing the complexity of the questions is a modification. This slide should provide a quick reference for you to consider how to adapt your curriculum to meet students' needs. White boxes are accommodations. The shaded box can be an accommodation or a modification, depending upon the extent of simplifying content, and the yellow boxes are modifications. Any student can receive an accommodation during instruction, but in order to receive an accommodation on a standardized assessment, such as the PARCC, formal documents must be submitted to state education boards. English language learners and SWD have the legal documents of IEPs, 504 plans, and ELL plans to support their use of accommodations, which are always determined by a multidisciplinary team. Also, in order to use these accommodations on assessment, teachers must provide these same accommodations during instruction. When determining appropriate accommodations, first determine the content standard. Be careful not to impose your own values here. For example, is your procedure for grading homework and independent work contingent on completion or on accuracy? Completion may not be possible for many students with accessibility issues. They may require extended time, may not have someone at home who can read to them or scribe for them, etc. Ensure your target skills are related to content acquisition first. Then ensure access to content is possible for all learners. Students with disabilities who use accommodations are required to learn the same content at the same level of proficiency as their peers who do not use accommodations. One of the most powerful examples of the importance of accommodations is for students with print disabilities. A case in point. Middle school-age children with severe visual motor and visual processing disabilities could not independently read grade-level text or write a grade-level response. However, when the material is read aloud and the opportunity to dictate responses to a scribe is provided, the same students can use their auditory processing skills and reasoning ability to articulate their critical thinking about the material. Formal accommodations determined by researchers and supported by the U.S. Department of Education include these 4 categories: presentation, response, timing and scheduling, and setting. Presentation accommodations connect to how you might represent your content using UDL principles. Some of these accommodations are low-tech and low-prep, but others can require more preparation in order to provide them consistently. Response accommodations exemplify the UDL principle of multiple means of expression. These ensure that students with disabilities and ELLs have access to performance standards. Materials and devices to support student responses, or expressions, are known to not create a differential bias that favors the ability of the identified child to outperform non-disabled peers. Research has indicated that students identified for these accommodations have equal and not increased access to performance standards. Likewise, extended time, scheduled breaks, and the opportunity to take an assessment over time or at a time that is better for the student can also ensure access. Children with anxiety and processing difficulties require these accommodations, or they would not be able to demonstrate their competency on assessment. It's hard not to imagine a need for reducing distractions. If a child has a test read aloud and is dictating a response, the talking individuals might disrupt others who require a quiet space to think. However, teachers should think about using technology-based materials to reduce distractions, rather than altering an inclusive setting. In fact, the PARCC assessment will be provided to all students with accessibility features. Have you considered creating accessible formative assessments? To conclude this section on effective instruction by design, I propose a toast to 21st century learning and the tremendous opportunities technology offers to equalize access to learning for all children. In the context of the workload you might anticipate to ensure access by incorporating these technologies, as well as UDL principles and differentiation, I ask you to consider this quote and the consequences of inaction. I have come to a frightening conclusion. I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. Thank you for your attention.